I was messaging with a someone on Patreon, and they were asking me about uh, not having a voice or feeling like they're not inspired or they're young and they're starting out, and it's like I don't have a voice yet, so there's no, what am I supposed to write? And it was just like an interesting topic because I think we all feel like, like I personally don't feel like every single time I sit down to write, like, okay, here we go, I'm gonna create something amazing. Like I'm just sometimes it's like I'm excited to write. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I gotta write. Sometimes, you know what I mean? Like you're not always feeling like what you're gonna write is amazing. And so it was kind of just it was an interesting topic to figure out about inspiration and whether or not inspiration matters or whether or not you should just be working and whatever comes out comes out. I think that was like a Seth Godin quote where he was like, don't wait for inspiration. You just got to write. You just got to work. And hopefully whatever comes out, just the act of writing is going to yield something. So I don't know if you ever feel like that. Like if you ever feel like, oh, I can't write right now because I'm not inspired.
I would say that I feel like that every time I write. Um, I think the trick is it depends on I guess the context of where you are in the process. Like, are you like the hardest process? The hardest part of the process for me is the the beginning. Like, what is the concept? What is the macro? What is trying to be said? What is the point? Or, maybe it doesn't even start that way. Maybe it starts with a color. Like, oh, I like this aesthetic, so let me just move forward with this idea and see where it leads. It's that initiation, whether it's an idea or a quote or a chord progression or something motific like rhythmic, um, or it's an emotion, or it could be a costume, it could be a prop design, it could be a floor design, it could be anything. But that initial trigger, that catalyst, is always the hardest thing. And then it's sort of like I like using the doodle analogy, where you start a doodle, it could be anything, and the next thing you doodle is based off what you previously doodled, and then it just keeps manifesting itself into almost like wallpaper. Like it's not like I didn't set out to draw a lion. Um, it's I don't know what I'm drawing. It's just I just going through the process. Um, so I think what could be interesting is answering that question, you know, based on like we would give that context. Like, let's answer it based on the season just ended. Let's say it's indoor. WGI championships just happened, and now you have this hiatus. And what's the next idea? What's the next plan? What are you doing next season? Um, in that context, I would try to be inspired by things. That sounds weird. Try to be inspired. That's not what I meant to say.
Well, I mean,
I meant to say,
isn't that what we're doing in general? Is just trying to be inspired anytime, right?
well, I think, let me rephrase it. I would put myself in a place where it is likely, or I would be able to be inspired, like getting away, taking a vacation, going somewhere I've never been before. It's something maybe a little more practical and close to home. It could be just going for a walk. It could be going to the beach and just walking around, because that's not in my routine. That's not something I do all the time. So it would, yeah.
So polite. You're so polite, Mila. That was the way to do it.
She just woke up from a nap, bedhead. And I would.
I haven't talked yet, Daddy.
Yeah, I know. Can Daddy finish? Okay, I'm gonna finish first. So, trying to do those things, but even like less physical inspiration, but more like introspective, is try to figure out like what are the daily struggles, or what are the it could be a struggle of a lifetime, but you can draw on any of that. And I talked to somebody recently about, what reflecting on the things in your life that are great and then retracing the steps. How did they get that way? And that can be put to music or a linear, pacing, whatever the medium is. If it's a marching band show, or it's a pop song, or it's an opera, or it's an indoor show, you can map that out. And then you can also look at the thing like what in your life is not going so well, and then can you retrace those steps and go, that's where I screwed up. That's where I made a decision that put me where I'm at right now. And then asking yourself, like, did you learn from it? And if you learned from it, there's something valuable there. There's music in that. And there's a way to put that on paper. So, I mean, I could keep answering or responding to your question or your situation based on the context. So now let's say the show is planned out, it's done, like we know what the theme is, the floor is picked out, and you're in the middle of the show somewhere, movement 3, and you got to write bar 27 to bar 88. And now you're stuck. In that context, you don't know what you're doing. You're not inspired, you don't feel like writing. I think that's a completely different thing. That I think that's more along the lines of what you said about, like, you just get up and you write and you just do it. And I think the other thing I tend to inject a lot more patience into, like, I'm not forcing it. If I don't have an idea yet, I don't have an idea yet. But once it's planned out and you're in the middle of it, like, just write. And if it sucks, delete it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, let's dig into what you were talking about. Like, if we just kind of back up and we're talking about, you said find something that's personal to you, something that either got you to where you are right now, positive, negative, and then try to find something in that. I kind of draw a parallel to something that we do a lot, which is, I know we talk about building parameters, and I'm assuming you're not talking about taking something that happened to you and taking it literally, but maybe using that as a source of, just looking at something that happened and then finding one little pinpoint or one little event or one little item or something in there, and then using that, like you said, on the doodle, like taking that and then doodling from there, and I think that that's one thing that's helped me a lot over the years is those parameters, right? Like finding something and then saying, okay, well, that is a constant. Everything else is variable. So I can kind of build on that. And then when you get to the next constant, you say, okay, I'm going to cement that next constant and keep building on that, and I think for me, like, the hardest part for sure is measure 1, nothing on the page. And a lot of times I feel like we talk about finding a way to have that first constant, like that first rule that we need to make.
I was just talking to Andy Toth about this, and he called it like your anchor, and you just go with it and you see where it leads you, and it could literally be anything. It could be anything. So why not make it something? I know that sounds weird. I don't know how useful that is, but it could be anything. Like you could say, what you just mentioned before we started the recording is a buzz into a tap roll.
Right.
Zarra. Maybe that's the theme. And then how can you deconstruct that? How can you elaborate on that? How can you layer that? How can you, make that multi-dimensional, and where does that lead? And then all of a sudden you have a doodle, and it's based off this one stupid thing, the seed show, our doodle was 3. And whatever that means to you, it could be mother, father, child, or whatever. Could mean anything. We came up with the 1-1-2, right? Or was
1-2-1.
1-2-1?
1-2-1.
I can't remember my own
Mom,
stuff.
dad.
But
kid.
anyway, it's the doodle, right? And it's like,
Right.
jut, jut, jut. All right. So what can we do with that? And it appeared throughout the whole show. Or, jut, jut, jut.
Right.
It was always in a form of a couple and a single, back to back. And it just manifested itself, and it doodled its way into the whole show. So,
right.
I mean, anything like that. And obviously it gets more complex when you're dealing with melody and harmony, and you have to be able to follow the linear progression of the music.
I think, part of that stress also is when you have that blank page and you're like, oh, we'll just make a doodle, and then the whole show is based around that. It's like the pressure of that doodle to be perfect, is because the reverberation of that doodle is going to exponentially grow by the time you get to the end of the show. And it's hard to like not think about that. Like, oh my God, that first ingredient has to be so perfect that you can spawn a whole universe out of that, and like just thinking, okay, well, a month goes by and you can be like, oh, we'll just erase it. Like, that's like all of that pressure and stress is all like real time happening when you first write that thing. Or do you feel like you found a way to shut that off? Is that a superpower?
No, I think giving yourself permission or allowing yourself to define it as, this is who we are right now. So it's not like, is that the perfect doodle? It'll never be the perfect doodle. So, but that's the doodle of today. Like whatever the date is, whatever the time is.
Right.
That was what it was at that date and time. So you can save yourself a lot of second guessing, anxiety, with just accepting that this is who we are right now. And then we're going to go with it, and we're going to be somebody else tomorrow. We're going to be somebody else, a year from now when we're doing the next project.
Right.
And then to look back in the past at things that you've done, that's who you were then. So you just leave it alone.
Maybe the
progress.
way that you're saying that is that there's not a what's the word? There's not a subjective good or bad attached to that, because it's personal. It's you. It's real. It's right. There is no one is saying that whatever that circumstance that you want to draw from is a good or bad choice, and I think maybe that's where our human nature tends to get. I know I fall into that, is like, oh, is this first idea a good idea? And it's maybe finding a way to accept that it doesn't matter if it's good or bad. Right. You're just moving forward.
And the cool thing about that is you can, and we've done this many times, almost every year, is the idea changes as it's like alive. The idea is alive, and you start with one thing and then you're halfway through the show. Yes, I approve of those snacks. To make sure. All right, don't play drums.
I need snack approval too later.
Okay. She's getting behind a drum set right now. Yeah, allow yourself, like, you don't have to be locked into anything. I mean, you could pivot off. I mean, sometimes we've done this with Adam's lyrics, is that you pivot off one word in the lyric that sends the show off into some other direction.
Right.
It changes the context of everything. And then you start looking at it like, oh, wow. So that's really what that meant. We really didn't know what we were doing with the doodle, but now it kind of looks like a lion. So yeah, we were making a lion.
Right.
It's like, no, we weren't.
Okay. So
it turned out to be one.
Let's talk about that. What kind of mental state is it, like ignorance or like aloofness, that is required to be able to pivot, like to take a 90-degree pivot? When you started off, I'm heading to Disneyland. Never mind, I'm going to Magic Mountain. Like, what kind of mental state does it take to kind of be in that ability to do that? Or is that a weird, do you even think about that?
I don't think a lot of those. I'm trying to think of a situation where any of those pivots or, where you take the fork in the road either direction. I don't recall any of them actually being something tangible.
Mm.
It's more like giving permission for something that's already there,
Right.
or doubling down on an idea that you were just like dipping your foot in the pool. And it's
Right.
like, well, hey, if we're gonna do that, let's just go full out and do it and not apologize for it.
Right.
Or you've dipped your foot in the pool and it's like, you know what, that is starting to tell another story it's getting too complex. Let's just stay out of that pool and let's keep going this way. A lot of it is it's just mental. It's like, okay, this part, I'm trying to give an example that's useful, but let's say I want to do like the group is in a really tight condensed form, and I want to explode outward because it means that we're moving on to the next journey, that we're leaving the place where we are, and we're venturing outward. Well, then I might think that that seems like a pretty bold move. Like all of a sudden we're just enlightened and we're all just going to run to whatever the glory land is. So I might say, well, I think decisions like this tend to be made with some questions and some apprehension. And so instead of exploding out into that, they're going to leave one by one, and they're going to start slow and speed up, and they're going to start slow and speed up. And then now it starts to look like something completely different.
Right.
But the way you implemented it was based off the narrative that's in your head. And you don't even have to tell anybody what that narrative is. You probably want to tell your students so they perform better, but they always perform better when they know what's going on. At least they have a general sense and they can define the details themselves. But but that's just an idea right there. It's like, okay, so now it's telling a different story, but it's the same drill move, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's telling a different story.
Well, I think that's really cool is like what you just were able to, it was a really simple idea, what you just talked about, but it yields a really complex circumstance once implemented. And I think maybe that's another hurdle is again, I'm just speaking from my own sense of, angst, which is always feeling like, okay, I got to come up with the most beautifully rich, complex, interesting masterpiece ever. And like only worrying about that, where it's like, if you just take a really simple idea and focus on the way the implications that idea might have, that's where like interest and complexity can come from, and not worrying about trying to create complexity for complexity's sake. I don't know if there's something there, but do you ever kind of have to toggle between wanting to create something complex versus just focusing on a simple idea?
I never want to create something complex.
I feel like if you've ever watched anything you've created, that's like a weird statement to have come out of your mouth.
So I didn't want to. I'd say don't do it. It's man, I don't even know what you just asked. I'm trying to wrap my head around because there's so much in there.
Well, like, part of that, I'm speaking from a place of doubt, like the kinds of, I'm trying to figure out where my doubts come from.
I got what I was going to say. I lost my train of thought a little bit. I was trying to be funny, but I'm going to back up a little bit. So back to the original question that you said you were asked, and this relates to it, is that you can't just sit down and say, oh, I have no ideas. You have to give yourself like the playground or the maze that you're going to travel. Like you have to build that first before you really know what you're doing, or what you're going to do. So I like to like I can't just come up with something out of thin air. It's like the it's like the the old um, brass scores I used to get. Um, that was here's this 12 bars of silence and drum break. And then at the end of the drum break, there's a tempo change, a key signature change,
Right.
a time signature change,
Feel
and
change.
it's like, well, okay, so now I'm just creating the transition for you.
Right. But even though, there's parameters. So, there's the front and the back.
Right.
It's if the show started with a 32 bar drum break.
Well, I've done that too. That's horrible. So yeah, it's like those are like the worst moments when you don't have a conversation. So you have to create the conversation. So what I've done in the past is I've actually had like a map that no one knows about. It's some song or some melody or something that I'm writing to, but you can't hear it. And I think that's a good trick to get yourself out of the hole, like to get yourself started. And you don't even have to commit to it fully. Like you can write it and decide halfway through that you don't like the original idea and you want to keep going with this thing that you just stumbled upon. And then that becomes the thing.
Right.
And then no one has to know that how you started it. They just see the end result. I think a lot of those things are just mental tricks. Like, I've done this working with you. Like when we started Cage, I think Cage, I wrote the first minute with no music.
Yeah.
It's just a motif. It's 5 years ago. I can't remember where that came from, but I know I had something in mind. When I originally started writing it, but no one hears it, and that's okay.
I remember getting that initially and was like, what made you write this? Like you had, our parameter was Mike just going to write something and then I'm going to write the front ensemble stuff after. And then when you got it and it was like, it for sure felt composed, but it definitely sounded like it could have lived on its own, but it also sounded like there was music to it.
Yeah, I think that's when I'm the most content with what I've done is when, like, if you listen to it and you think it sounds composed, that means a lot to me because I know the torture that was happening behind the scenes to make something out of nothing. And it's so weird, man. You wouldn't think it would be weird if you just like listed what we're doing on paper, but the absence of melody and harmony and just pitch is it really is tough.
Right.
It's the most dreaded thing for me. Like, write a drum break. I know it's not that way for some people. I know they really like the opportunity to shine in a way that battery usually can't.
Right.
Because they don't want to get in the way of the melody or the focus. It's not something I particularly enjoy. I love writing the music to melodic content. I think all these little things, I know we're like spiraling into these tangents, but
it's all good.
But I think if I were this person that asked that question and I listened to some of this, I'm hopeful that they could walk away with just some different ways to think. Right. And then not even saying that any of these ways are right. It's just by hearing what other people do and the other processes, you may come up with your own. Right. That creates your own voice.
Have you seen the movie Finding Forrester?
I have not.
It's really, really good. Highly recommended. It's definitely you're gonna shed some tears, but it's really good. It's one of those heartfelt, like kind of coming of age mentorship kind of movies. But Sean Connery is one of the main characters, And
Okay.
he plays a writer. He's like this really famous writer, and he takes his kid under his wing and is teaching him about writing and stuff. And one of the quotes or one of the stories he tells, I was kind of use this as a vehicle, was he talks about, here's a piece that I wrote. What I want you to do is just write, like literally start copying it and keep going until you find your own words. He was kind of using that as like well, if you don't have anything to say, use somebody else's words to get the juices flowing. And then once you've found your own words, then you can kind of expound based on that. And,
I think
I
we
think,
all do that anyway. Just
yeah,
if you back up far enough, like I was sitting there copying Tom Monk's beats for years. Um, I think I may have mentioned this last time we talked, but the 89 cadets thing was just like, I was 18. I was 18 when that was going down, and that was inspirational.
Right.
Extremely. Yeah, I think that's a great method. Is if you're unsure, you don't know what you're doing, just start copying what you like, and then you'll figure it out.
Yeah.
You figure out what's you.
And that's different from, don't get us wrong, we're not advocating for taking somebody else's music and then putting it.
I'm not saying you have to show it to anybody or publish it.
It's
just saying, just do it.
It's a process though. Like, right.
That's
why you in music education you study the great masters, not so that anyone only wants to ever hear Beethoven for the rest of time, but it's because you take something is a step in time and history to where we are now, and you use that to just keep stepping forward, and how can you step forward if you didn't know what came before, and I think that especially starting out, I think last time we talked about, everyone's got all this creativity, and we listen to all these students' compositions, and it's like amazing to hear what they're coming up with, but there is the other side of that coin. There might be some people that struggle at the beginning in terms of their creative energy, and maybe that's a good route to kind of get unclogged from that. Is cool. Well, if you're not feeling like you have anything to say right now, say something that someone else has already said in your own development, so that you can kind of, figure out what somebody else was doing. And I think that probably takes a lot of different, that's got a lot of different implementations, like I've seen a lot of people kind of especially in the activity, they look up to somebody, and they like, even me as a, aspiring wind arranger composer, like, all I can do is look at some of the stuff that I've gotten from Doug Thrower or Jay Bocook and look at what they've done. And like, hopefully one day I can kind of try to recreate some of that, but it's part of that journey is just studying and trying to recreate, finding something you're inspired by and then recreating it. And hopefully you get to a point where you're not doing it on the back of someone else anymore. You're trying to do it yourself.
Hang on. Video's coming back.
The blackout.
There we go.
Oh, yeah,
nice.
It's nice.
It's my, my camera just shuts off when it wants to. Yeah. And then just to kind of wrap it up, I did want to say that looking outside the activity, I think, is extremely important. If you're just stuck and listening and trying to be inspired by things in the activity, I think it's extremely limiting. Any idea that I've fallen in love with, especially lately, when I say lately, I mean, I guess like the last 10 years, has been, I've drawn inspiration from things completely outside the activity. In fact, I really enjoy not indulging in the activity until the very end. I like seeing the end product. I like being a fan on the final day.
Right.
I like sit and I watch everybody. It's like amazing.
Because you can let your guard
I-
down and just enjoy it and not worry about your
Yeah,
own
it's not even,
process.
it's a guard. Well, yeah, I guess it is a guard for me. Like I'm protecting my lizard brain. Like I don't want my lizard brain to hear anything else from anybody.
Right.
Because it's I just don't need that during the preparation part of the season, or you're still composing, you're still writing, you're still staging. The ideas are still alive. It's not like I had a blueprint of this building and then we're just the foreman and we're just going to build it. It's not like that.
Right.
It's not a done deal. And you kind of don't know what it's going to look like until you're done anyway. So like, I don't want to be influenced or I don't want to be second guessing something I'm doing. And actually what's funny is like the worst thing that could happen is that somebody else had a very similar idea. This happened to us at Blue Nights. We picked our repertoire and we were like in love with these tunes. And then we found out that like 2 other chorus were playing the same song. And immediately I was like,
yeah,
we can't do that tune. But then, we came to our senses and we said, well, we're just going to do it our way and not worry about what other people are doing. And I think I just don't want that information because you can't unlearn it. You can't get it out of your head. So where I was going with all this is get out of the activity mentally, go watch a play, go watch a movie, go for a walk, travel, take pictures, like go to a museum, go sit in the woods for a couple hours. But obviously not now, but you can do all that online virtually.
You can do it all
Read
online.
a book.
You can, I mean, I've been falling back in love with Bach and just trying to find music to play and doodle with. And I think one of the things that's cool about where we are right now is you have a little bit of that safety net of time to kind of play a little more, to be able to explore some ideas without feeling the pressure of a clock. And I think that we were talking about this before, is that we have to take advantage of that little bit of that free time, that we may not get again. So I think that that's important, to expand as much as you can. And it's okay to not be great at it, but I think it's important to kind of get your tentacles and just try to find other things to be inspired by. That's really cool. Awesome. So good topics. We'll come up with some other stuff next time, but thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
All right. Talk to you later, Kevin.
See ya.